Hello, everybody. Welcome to the launch of Primed. My name is Robbie Ahmed and go by he, him pronouns. And I'm tuning in from Treaty 13, which is Toronto. And since we're going to be talking about Primed, which is a sexual health resource for queer, trans men, transmasculine, non-binary people, it's so important to kind of think about how that also intersects with gender and decolonization, because we know that gender diversity has existed on this land for many years before colonization. Also, Primed is such a historic event, so I'm happy to be gathering here with all the community members to kind of talk about it. I know that the first Primed was released in 2007 and then updated again in 2015. And now we're coming again back as a trans community to update it in its new version and kind of talk about why it's so important for us to keep having sexual health conversations. So I think I'll just pass it on to all of our community members that are here gathered today. And if you want to just like introduce ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here today to have this conversation. My name's Orion, and I will be the moderator for tonight. And I'll pass it to one of our panelists.
Awesome. So my name is Caleb. I'm not sure what I'll tell you about myself other than I am a wonderful looking 36 years old. And I work in information services with University Health Network. So I'm what you would call a library technician. That's probably about as interesting as it gets with me. So I'll pass it on to the next.
Hi, my name is Vincent, and I use he, him pronouns. And I think the most interesting thing about me, besides being a fabulous 32-year-old, I have a rabbit that has taken over my house in the several months she's been living with me, and she is in charge. She's listening, by the way.
Hey everyone, I am Stévia. I am the African Caribbean Black Trans and MSM Harm Reduction Coordinator at Black Cap, and I am so happy to be here today. You know, to talk with you guys about these things. I'm not really sure what the most interesting thing about me is, so that might be the most interesting thing about me.
Awesome. That's so amazing to hear from everybody today. And I'm more than pleased and honored to be a part of this conversation. Definitely more conversations and spaces needs to be had around openly discussing our sexual health as trans masculine or just the transgender and non-binary community openly about our sexual health and our sexuality and end the stigma. So I'm very excited that Prime is launching and that this resource is available on the internet openly for anyone. So yeah, we can get straight to it. First, there's no doubt about it that there is stigma around our bodies, and especially when it comes to like healthcare and the healthcare system. Personally, I would like to know from each one of you, how did you overcome that experience and just like the stigma around just like getting tested and being in charge of your sexual health?
Okay, I'll be the one that goes first. Fine. How did I overcome it? Well, honestly, it was just getting older. The older I got, the less of a shit I gave about encountering any kind of like medical service provider stigma. Yeah, like just a couple of weeks ago, I unfortunately had to go to the hospital for a thing, and like the doctor, I got into a motorcycle accident, but let's not talk about that. So the doctor's like touching around, feeling to see how things are, and noticed that I had chest scars and was like, "Oh, what's that for?" And I was like, "Nothing relevant to what you're doing for why I'm here in the hospital." And he was like, "Okay." And I was like, see, now younger me would have been like, "Oh God, like, how do I address this? This thing's gonna go so wrong." So yeah, I think it's just getting older, and it's also more and more service providers entering the field with more knowledge than they used to have. That's for sure, for sure. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I think I agree with Caleb. Getting older makes it a little bit easier to just be self. And I think, well, I'm a newcomer to Canada, so I think not having to be tied to anyone here really, and just being able to be self and having the support. So I have a social worker who's like really amazing at advocating for me. I remember being in a hospital and this my doctor sent the referral as Mr. And he's said, in the thing, he, him pronouns and all that. Lady looks at me and decides, oh, Miss, and then referred to me with she, her pronouns. And my social worker was like, no, sorry, he, it's he, and I didn't have to do that for myself. But I think her standing strong for me, and again that age thing, and not having to feel like if I'm myself I'm gonna have some issues with family or people, whatever. It makes it easier for me to be able to advocate for self in those situations.
I had a number of negative experiences with healthcare providers, especially earlier in my transition. And I ended up taking an approach where I started doing formal training for healthcare providers and presentations and workshops for healthcare providers and students in the healthcare field. And it was really empowering because even though there were still people working in the field who needed the education, there was a new generation of doctors and nurses and social workers coming out of these institutions that had this information. And people that I had trained or people who I worked with who had connections to healthcare centers were then asking me to train their staff. And so I got to do that and help build some policies around how specific centers can be affirming spaces. And that was really cool being involved in that kind of work. And even things like the intake forms and the questions people ask. So it meant that, yes, I had maybe a terrible experience, but somebody else after me would have a better experience. I also deal with a lot of these things with humor. I went to a walking clinic one day, and given the symptoms that I was having, the doctor had told me, assuming that I was a cis man, I would need a prostate exam. And I had said to him, well, before you lube up that finger, I need to tell you that I do not have a prostate. And I'm glad he was sitting down for what I was about to tell him. Like, yeah, no, I have a vulva. And he was a little bewildered, but I got out of getting a finger up my ass that day, so it all turned out.
Yeah, no, I totally feel all of you. Like recently after an experience, I remember now not looking at providers and going like, oh no, I'm wrong. Now I'm like, you live in Toronto. If you don't know about trans health, that's on you not doing your medical education. That's not about me. Can't. but yeah, but also now, like we see, I've been telling people I'm so excited about Gottmik being on TV, seeing that they're trans men with different sexualities that are out there, and that kind of reduces stigma too, and going like, we exist. If you're not up to date, that's on you.
Yeah, I totally agree. Representation matter, and just being properly educated in the field that if you're dedicating like your working life to actually understand people's like intersectionalities in life, and the patients that you're treating. Um, One thing I also wanted to touch upon is over the years, what are some of the things that you've noticed that are important in terms of getting frequent testing, including like pap smear or getting HIV um, treatment or care or anything of that sort. Um, Over the years, what have you learned about the importance?
One of the things that I learned was, pretending something doesn't exist, or pretending in the example of an injury, ignoring it doesn't make it go away. So when I was still sexually active with multiple partners, I was getting tested regularly, because just knowing whether or not I had an STI would mean that if I did, I could deal with it sooner rather than later and get it in the earlier stages, and not pass it along. So that, of course, is the thing that's really important about it. It's about taking care of your own health. I also recognize, from that previous question, like there are barriers to it. If you have a negative experience, you're not going to be motivated to wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to go talk to another person at the sexual health clinic who might treat me like shit today. So I have noticed some changes locally in terms of the treatment. So it's definitely getting better. And sometimes the type of organization you go to is better. So I'm answering fewer questions about my identity when I go to an organization who's mandated to go working with men who have sex with men versus an organization whose mandate is the entire population. So I've noticed that can make a huge difference. And if you are living in a city where you are lucky enough to have that, I don't live in Toronto. So when you're in Northern Ontario, there are some limitations, right? So taking care of your sexual health is part of taking care of yourself and part of taking care of your overall health. And having safe and affirming access to sexual health care is really important as well. It's not all on the individual.
I mean, that was a really great answer. I don't know what I can really add to that, other than I think that what's great is that, at least in urban centers, like a lot that sexual testing and sexual services are now available for trans and transmasculine and NB people, right? Like there was most definitely a time not that long ago when like if I needed to go have a pap smear, then like it was really fucking awkward, like at minimum it was awkward. And like now there's gynecologists or urologists even, there are professionals and service providers that are like familiar with our different kinds of bodies. And so like going to get checked for STIs has gotten a lot less soul crushing. And like, I don't know, for me personally, like I'm on PrEP. And like if 3 or 4 years ago, like this wouldn't have even been something that I had, one, been aware of, and two, would have been available to someone like me, someone like us, right? And there's something very affirming about being able to go to like your local clinic and like sit in a waiting room with a bunch of other gay men, queer and gay men, and be like, I belong here and I can walk through that door and get what I need and like generally in life not encounter ignorance or other shitty things, right? So the resources exist now, and I feel really good about being able to take care of myself in better ways now than before.
Yeah, that was a pretty thorough answer, and yeah, Caleb, I hear what you say too. Um, and in terms of the access need for resources and so on, that's great, that's there. But I think when we break it down to not just trans men or trans men who have sex with men, but we then start to look at things like race and ethnicity and so on, um, you add another layer onto these things. And a lot of times when a lot of guys like me go to a hospital, we don't see folks who look like us. It's either they are trans and they understand, or they understand, they might be cis and they understand trans health needs, but then there's that missing component of understanding the need, that the specific needs that ACB folks might have, that white folks might not have, or well, other BIPOC people might not have. And then when we do find someone who looks like us, they're either cis, or cis and they don't really understand, because I think, yeah, education is getting a lot better now, especially when we got people like Vincent going into the healthcare and teaching, these things is more prevalent. But a lot of times people aren't able to separate culture from what they should be doing professionally, and if they do it, then there's still something lacking. So I think that for a lot of people, it's still going to be really difficult to access these services. And it's really important that we do, because like Vincent said, if ignoring it doesn't make it go away. um, and then what ends up happening is the rates go up, and it looks like communities just not accessing or whatever, but it's really what is there to access.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think I was in a unique position because I was thrown into sexual health, but sexual health for cis men, being a trans man. So it was an interesting thing, but it made me realize, I'm like, wow, there are vaccines available for MSM, but what's available for me? So it kind of made me go like, discover the answers. And I think that's why Prime is so important. But it also made me go like, wow, I guess trans men really need to kind of like find out like dig deeper to find out what's available for us. Because sometimes you're like, okay, this eligibility criteria is kind of wonky, MSM, but is it trans MSM? Like, it's about to ask like, and I think that's why we're like kind of forced to empower ourselves and go like, so what do I need with the body parts and things I have currently, right? But I guess so my question is also the same with Orion. What about you?
I totally agree with like what everyone says. And for me, especially with Stévia, accessing like healthcare is something that, to be honest, I'm a bit wary about still. I feel like with hearing what everyone says, like with time, it'll like be less daunting, but it's just, and things are getting better, but like being just like when your race is factored into these institutionalized um like these, like something like the healthcare has never been favorable amongst Black people, period, let alone like being trans on top of that. So there's um that like barrier for sure, but it's definitely getting better. But we're doing better with overcoming that. Like Caleb mentioned, the soul crushing phase of it for sure. um I would also love to know, like, when did everyone discovered the sex that they wanted and what their body needed or required for pleasure, or whether it be self pleasure, and just receiving pleasure and giving pleasure.
I think for me, that's a kind of strange question, like because I think it's only last year that I really started to fully start to transition, and before sex was always really, eh, I enjoy it, it's whatever, but it's like, yeah, you know, and I think it was a lot because I didn't feel like myself. So I think now that I'm actually starting to get to be more on the outside, who I am on the inside, um, it's starting to change things for me. So I'm still kind of in like a discovery stage of what I like and what I want and who I want even, like it's yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I think like I'm still kind of discovering that for myself.
I think for me, I mean, I first discovered pleasure, so to speak, when I was 13, and it's been a growing, changing, evolving process for me. Um, you know, letting go of a lot of the things that I was taught. I was raised Catholic. Um, I know that says it all, right? When I was 13, I was still at a Catholic all girls school and had very different upbringing around things like sexuality, and it's different from how I feel and think about it right now and my beliefs around it. So my beliefs around pleasure are far more positive than they were when I was first discovering it. And there's a lot less shame around it. And then throughout my teen years, discovering my sexuality and my attraction to men and women, and exploring those things more and more through my teen years and my adult years. What feels good changes over time, especially being on testosterone and the physical changes that happen on testosterone. Like, my clitoris is a lot bigger than it was when I was pre testosterone. So that changes things. It changes how pleasurable sex is with different partners. And it's this ever growing thing and always changing. And it also changes with every partner. And that's been my journey. And it's something that I don't think I'm ever going to get to a point where I've experienced everything that can be experienced and know everything about my sexuality that I could possibly know, because there's always more to know and explore about myself.
Yeah, and I'll say the same thing. I mean, or a similar thing, which is like, I don't know if I can really say that I've, discovered everything that I want or need sexually. Like, I think it's just going to be an ongoing process. And especially like it's changed over the course of time and hormones, of course, but also because I've had bottom surgery. And so I've had to kind of relearn how certain parts of me work. And I've had to practice and work around my new plumbing, so to speak. So I'm still working on finding what feels good for me. And I kind of like that that's probably going to be a lifelong thing. Like I hope that it's a process that is exciting and pleasurable over time. It also helps that I've been meeting a lot more men who are no longer like timid or scared of trans men's bodies. Like there's a lot more like desire, like outward desire. And like sometimes that can be a little gross, but also, like when people are coming to me on Scruff thinking that they're going to get like a very tailored specific experience, and then realize that like, some of us have different bodies and some of us like different things. And some of us with beards are not all daddies, but and some of us are. Who's to say? But the point is that I yeah, I am still on this journey of finding what feels good, and it's really awesome to start meeting other folks who are turned on by trans men and trans masculine folks, and yeah, I'm excited to see what comes. Pun intended.
Yeah. For me, I felt like being trans just kind of threw me into consent culture and knowing what is like right for my body, because it was like gender dysphoria, right? Like, I don't want my chest to be touched. This is the kind of sex I want because of my body. So it forced me already to start negotiating, because I know like I don't want people to touch me the way I don't want to, right? It's better. So kind of like threw me in that. But I think I'm still like discovering that. I recently was discovering through writing about like sexual imperfection, and that made me go like, what does sex conversations look like when they're focused on performance and pleasure? Because I feel like we're so caught up in STI world sometimes that I was just like, let's discover that for trans folks, right? And I think that still is a journey for me to figure out what that means.
Amazing. I love what everyone shared, especially Stévia. I'm also in the my early years of transitioning and learning my body and what I like and what I don't like, for sure. Uh, Now I want to ask each and one of you a rapid questions. So I ask you a question, and the first thing that comes to mind, no filter, just say it. So I'll start with Robbie. Um, would you have sex in a car?
Public sex, yay. So
And Caleb, lights on or off?
Ooh, lights on. No explanation.
No explanation. Vincent, silicone or water-based lube?
Depends on the toy being used. No silicone lube with silicone toys.
Very important. Very important information to know. Stévia, sex in the morning or at night?
It's a I go with sex anytime. I don't I didn't realize it was like a right time, wrong time. Sex when it feels good.
Yeah, that's fair. And one last question I want to ask everyone is, compared to where you are at now, what advice would you give to your younger self about sexual health and sex in general? Maybe Stévia, maybe you can start.
um I don't I don't know. I think because where I grew up, sex itself is still like a taboo topic regardless of orientation. Um I think but that was not something that stopped me from being me. So I feel like I would tell my younger self to just be bold and be me. Uh, I mean, I was always kind of bold, but like just be more outright with self rather than I guess in the dark being outright. I guess I don't know. Like I never hid, so I never really had to like come out because I never hid who I was, but I was never really outright with who I was. So I guess more like be more confident and bold with who you are and what you like. I realized later in life that it was actually safer than I thought it would be. So
Yeah, I hear that, and I add to that. I feel like this should be like RuPaul's Drag Race. Like I should have like a little picture of myself as like a youngster that I can talk to. Young Caleb. Let me tell you about no. That yeah, I agree with Stevia. Like, be bold. I wish that my younger self wasn't so terrified of all of the stigma that I thought I was going to encounter and did sometimes. But like, I feel like I was so much more worried about what was going to happen to me that I probably was hypersensitive about a lot of that stuff, you know? So yeah, but this is also something that I like have to remind myself of now. So talking to my younger self, I would also say like, I don't know if there's really like a way to get it right, you know, like just be you, breathe, um, and remember that you are lovable and like you deserve to be respected and have like great fucking sex, you know? So note to my younger self and stashing that away for myself later today too, probably.
I want to echo everything that Caleb just said as things I would say to my vagina. Because 15, 16-year-old me thought that the only way to be trans was to have bottom surgery. And I felt a lot of shame in my teenage years and my early 20s around still using my vagina for sex and hearing from so many places I'm not supposed to and not supposed to enjoy it, including psychologists who were allegedly experts on trans stuff that I won't name. So this kind of thing has a damaging effect, and it took me until I was in my early mid-20s to really love my cunt. And so what I would say to a younger me is it's okay to have love and respect for parts of your body, and loving that doesn't make you less trans. And having pleasure from your genitals doesn't make you less trans. Everyone's journey is different. Just like for some, bottom surgery is a must. For some, bottom surgery isn't, and it's okay to go with what feels good for you. And that's what I tell myself, and also say to my vagina, thanks for being there, buddy. Thanks for all the pleasure.
For me, it would be what I mentioned before, like take control of your sexuality, find info, dig it. If it doesn't exist, make it yourself. Like we have history of making like YouTube videos about our sexual health, and we can continue like expanding on that. And the last one was like, you're sexy, don't do things for other people. Like what's for you is for you. And just like embrace that. I think like I had those self-esteem issues before when I was younger, and now I'm like, honestly, it doesn't matter. Like, don't bother with people. Just do you.
Yeah, no, I totally echo that. And also, one thing I'd say to my younger self is that like, you know, like men have vaginas and like men like too, you know, like it's not this like gender is not this like linear thing that has been taught, especially through like Christianity for me personally. Growing up in a Caribbean household, like religion played a huge part in like how I view like my sexuality, and my self-esteem. So saying that like, yeah, you don't have to have bottom surgery, like if you don't want it. It's like, you know, pussy power can be represented all in whatever form. So yeah, I'll leave it on that note, pussy power.
I have a question for folks that I'm curious is how do you like negotiate things like when you're dating, looking for sex, especially with like cis men? I'm always very curious to know how trans guys are handling it. I know in the guide we covered a lot about like strategies to negotiate, bring it up. I know you folks use humor. Like, is there any stories that we can hear?
You want me to tell you how I bring it up? So I've actually been with my current partner for almost 8 years, and when we first started dating, we talked very candidly via text message. It was kind of hot about the things we liked, And I've gotten to a point in my life too with sexual partners. I tell them what I like and I tell them what is the sex that I want. And I ask them what they like and what they want. And it's a lot of communication because I'm not going to settle for something that isn't enjoyable. So that's what I navigate. And if somebody isn't interested in sex with me, then that's okay. I have a massive Rubbermaid bin of replacements for cis men.
I'm sorry, I totally forgot what the question was after you just said massive Rubbermaid bin. What was the question, Robbie?
I think more like how, yeah, how do you bring up any talk about your bodies on when you're hooking up with folks? Because I know it's always such an awkward thing to bring up, especially if people know or don't know, right?
Yeah, it can be. I went back and forth because I have personally found most of my sexual connections either using apps or mostly apps. And I used to just hang out on those apps and then get to know someone by talking to them. And then I would mention that I was trans and see how things went. And now I'm just I ain't got time for that shit. I just put it in my profile and if people are into it, they're into it. If people don't have a fucking clue, but they're still interested, I can work with that. I just put it front and center, you know? Yeah, that's the main thing. I just keep it front and center now, which I mean, I'm not stealth, but I also don't run through my life as yelling out that I'm trans every 5 minutes. But I do like to keep it in my profile. It makes it clear and it prevents a lot of unnecessary talking.
I'm with that making it clear thing. I think because in our culture, it's difficult for young trans folks to kind of identify with being trans. Um, it's important for us to see ourselves in older folks, realize that if I come out, if I, there's nothing wrong with me for feeling like a man inside. There's nothing wrong with me for realizing that I don't fit in anything that aligns with what my body says I should. So I feel like living as me in everything that I do is important, not just for sexual negotiation, but for those people who need that example. So it becomes easier for me when it comes to sex because people who meet me, whoever will get to that stage with me, or already know that I am. So it's not that difficult to kind of to negotiate for me, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I can agree that for me, I'm not shy from setting my boundaries and asking for what I deserve and what I feel that I deserve, and that translate into sex. Um, I'm also curious to know what you folks have experienced in terms of dating in this day and age, like online dating, like those dating apps like Tinder, like Grinder, like how has with your time transitioning, how has that interaction been in on these online sites? From my experience, for me personally, I've never really had the greatest experience because I just decided that, you know what, it's just not worth the headache for me personally. It's just a lot of stigma with Black men's sexuality, and to put that on top of being trans, um, and being proud that I have a vagina, and I don't want to follow this certain path of if you're transitioning, then you have to be the closest proximity to cis as possible. um So I'm just curious to know what folks' interactions been with the site, those like platforms and people on the platform. Any like juicy, juicy stories, Kiki?
I have some juicy stories. And you know what? Honestly, back in my cruising days, I really had a strong preference for going to bathhouses and cinemas. I backpacked around Europe for 3 months and spent a lot of time in those places versus going on the apps because there's just no bullshit. It's like you take off your towel, they see what you have, and you're not wasting time. And I did notice a difference between European bathhouses and Canadian bathhouses. My experience with the apps, I mentioned I live in Northern Ontario. So, you go on Squirt and year after year, it's the same few people. And it's not a large pool. Also not a large dating pool on the website, like at that time, plenty of fish and eval and all that. So it, it's hard to find not only sexual partners who are available, but sexual partners who are interested in trans guys. And so it was you'll contact a dozen people and be rejected by 11. And and I put it right in my profile that I was trans. And half the time people would think that I meant that I was a trans woman. And ask me why I'm wearing men's clothing, Like there was a lot of ignorance on the app, but there were some really good hookups that happened as well. And so I don't want to say it was all bad, but you had to go through a lot of bad dates and awkward and just unpleasant conversations to find the golden ones. That was my experience. But again, a city of 167,000 is going to be different than a city with over 1 million people.
I feel like it's been a different, it was a lot different when I first started hopping on the apps like 10, 12 years ago. Because, well, there was a lot of stigma. There was a lot of assumptions about trans men. And there was also like some really shitty opinions about whether or not we should even be on those apps, And so in the beginning, it was I would like go on the app for a couple of days and then I'd go off the app for a couple of weeks. And then I'd go on the app for a couple of days and then I'd go off the app for a couple of weeks. And it was just like, how much punishment can I take in a small period of time while trying to find sex? Again, it wasn't all bad. There's definitely, a big difference between when I first started using it versus now. In terms of like now I encounter way less stigma, idiocy, unfortunate questions. But I also I have to be honest with the fact that like I'm cis passing, and in a lot of situations people will be interacting with me through these profiles and they didn't actually read the profile. They're just interacting with me based on the picture. And so they're not immediately aware that I'm trans. And so I know that my experience can be quite a bit different than folks who are either non-binary or not cis-passing, etc. So at this point, I've been talking for a long time, so I've forgotten the question, but I don't know, like the apps have been okay for me. They've been okay for me. I go on and off of them, but over the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of changes in people's opinions and how they interact with me, and it's actually been pretty all right.
For me, I don't actually use apps outside of for like work. Um, there's there's so many reasons that I am vulnerable in using apps. So I am multi-disabled. Um, I am black. I am a newcomer. I am trans, and it just does not feel like it would be safe for me. So I don't use those apps at all. And I tried one time to see if I could like meet someone. I wasn't even looking for any partner and stuff, just like make some friends or whatever. And I made that very, very clear in the very first interaction. And it was as if when the person met me, they forgot that I said that. And all of a sudden, there was just like this partnering that was happening. And I'm just like, I didn't sign up for this. And it got really crazy really quickly. So that was like a first and last experience for me. I've never gone back there, and yeah, I don't think that I would. I mean, I check them out because in my work I have to support people who do use these things, and it's easy to kind of like find people to do outreach to. But in terms of for me dating on those sites, so no. I remember I was talking to this one person who I know I had on the thing I said, trans outreach, hit me up if you need a kit for party and play, that kind of stuff. And this guy, he hits me up and he's talking to me, and I say to him, you realize that because he's talking to me like, and he's calling me like names that people use for women. And I was like, you realize I'm a dude, right? And he said, oh, from your picture, it looks like you have breasts. And I'm like, yes. So why it says trans, And he was like, oh, so you're a trans guy? I said, yes. Dude disappeared quickly. Same thing. He thought that I was a trans woman because he saw breasts. Yeah, it was really really weird. And then he messaged after that at some point to say, it's really sick that trans guys are coming on here with breasts and you're a man, kind of thing, and it's luring people. And I'm just like, dude, I never you came into my inbox, I didn't talk to you, um and you were the one who tried to make it sexual. I didn't. So how am I, so that didn't feel safe. Like, I think that if I was trying to date someone and that happened, I would have been off the app real quickly. I would have been off of there quickly. The app isn't, my sign up isn't anything to do with my personal stuff. Is all linked to my work stuff. So I just, that person's blocked and that was that. But it felt like if I was even gonna think of using one of those sites for personal reasons, I was not going to after that. It doesn't feel safe.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Stevia says. I don't like apps. I like to scoop people out meeting in person because transphobia is not sexy. So I will find you attractive after I know where you stand on trans issues. And yeah, I just remember this funny story. When I was young, 13, I went on transpassions.com thinking it was like a cool site to meet people being trans, until I realized it was a fetish site. And I quickly was like, this is for people looking for trans people for fetishes. I was wrong. And I went away from that site.
That is hilarious. Um, I totally agree with Stévia for sure. It's like this huge barrier, especially like on these sites when they put it so boldly and so clearly on their bios, like no Asians, no blacks. Like, you already know without even entering the space that this like space wasn't designed or created with you in mind already. And you're like you're entering this, and then you're not only you live through all these intersectionalities, um, you're it's bound to be erased, and these like algorithms um, tend to favor people who get more interaction on the site, so people can like keep coming back to the site. And it's just like really messed up in on terms of like um, how, and it is a reflection on real life, like how bodies are viewed in this Western society in terms of like how our body is valued. I'm also curious to know, over the years, do you prefer like loud or quiet sex? How about you, Caleb, since you're dying over there?
Since I'm cackling away. I couldn't in a million years imagine having quiet sex. I think it would, like, all I can think of is just like Carrie Bradshaw on Sex in the City, and they're just like having that like super silent sex and how fucking awkward it is. No, I am very vocal in bed. And it's just like, I want to be able to lose myself in it. You know what I mean? And like, if I'm losing myself in good sex, then like, who knows what's coming out of my mouth. So loud all day.
Well, for me, I have some sensory issues at times, so I'd say in between. For me, in between, but it really depends on who I'm with. Yeah.
I'm not a teenager trying to not wake up my parents anymore. So, sorry, neighbors. It's loud.
Also in the loud camp, it also helps you gauge your partner as well, right? The more talking, the more communication. It's all good. Yeah.
So when I hear loud, I'm thinking of screaming and shit like that. Talking is fine.
I, t- I totally agree with Vincent. I'm not trying to try not to like my parents hear me. So like if the neighbors hear, well, whoops. Maybe get some earplugs. Maybe get some earplugs or take a walk. Well, I'll pass it to Robbie to end this amazing chat. It's been amazing being here with y'all and having this conversation, and just the importance of like Prime in this guide that I wish I had when I was a baby trans, to know that like people that look like me have like bodies like me, like guys can have like, you know, like vaginas and titties, and it's okay. uh, every body is unique, just like our experience here on earth, and I'm so excited for this to be available for everyone.
I'll second what Orion said. I guess I just want to maybe end it of like, why do you think having guides like Primed is important? I know like Vincent, you are one of the folks who've seen the guide from its like previous versions too. And yeah, I think for me, it's just seeing trans folks like present in their sexualities is so radical. And this guide has been radical for a while. So I'm excited to see it out there.
I mean, I'll jump in. Oh, so go ahead.
Um, in reading it, right, like something that stood out for me was like the myth busting, and I think that that is so important, especially for younger trans folks. Um, I remember I used to identify as gender nonconforming rather than trans because I didn't have surgeries or I wasn't on T, right? Because it wasn't available in my country, and oh no, I don't think I want to have top surgery. I don't think it's a thing that I really want to have. I'm not sure yet, but I learning that that does not take away from my identity as a man is so important to me. And if that's important to me in my 30s, I think that that little kid who is growing up somewhere else where it's not available and needs to hear, my body and how it looks doesn't dictate my transness is really, really important.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, for me, I feel like one, primed is important because, but also so do service providers, right? It's really great that like there's now this resource that is meant for our community, but like is also pretty good reading for people that should be like serving our community, right? So it's good to have that available there. And it's also just really nice to walk into a clinic and like see it on a shelf and be like, I can come here and like probably assume that I'm going to get the care that I need. It's great to see it. I'm so glad it exists. I'm so glad it's in its third iteration, like that's amazing. Thank you, GMSH, for continuing to like support this. Yeah, I'll leave it.
I am so happy Primed exists, and for me, figuring out my sexuality and navigating this, I was reading Primed 1 and Primed 2, so it is something that did help me and help me learn more about how to talk about sex with sexual partners and ways to keep myself safe. I love that there's a growing and evolving thing because technology changes, the way we hook up changes. And it's just so nice to see a resource made for people like me, because the sex education that I had in school was either be completely abstinent until you are married and only reproduce for the purpose of making more Catholic babies, or when I did finally go to public school, it was entirely just penises go in vaginas. This is how you use condoms and birth control, and that was it. It was so hetero sexist and so cis-sexist that there was not even mention of trans people or queer people in my sex education school. So having access to this is so important. And when the first guy came out, I hadn't even known any other trans men. So just knowing more.
I totally agree on the importance of this, especially healthcare providers that are supposed to provide care to us. Like education is power and it's knowledge, and it's like about fucking time. Like it's 2021, bitch. If you want to be in a healthcare system, no matter your culture, your pride, your ego, at the end of the day, we exist. We will always be here, and we will occupy these spaces. So you got to get to know our bodies and what we need to access proper healthcare without being triggered or just having an awful time just to get a fucking checkup.